have this much punch.
Even if you vote and then pass away, it's worth it, remember?
Their final appeals as Iowans brave sub-zero temperatures to caucus for their Republican Party candidates. Wind chill warning is in effect, and there's some concern the weather could impact today's turnout. The latest polls show former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is cutting into former President Donald Trump's commanding lead. 40% of Iowans say they identify with Trump's Make America Great Again. Thank you all for joining us this hour for America's Vote 2024, the Iowa Caucus. Joining me now is Editor-in-Chief at The Hill, Bob Cusack. Bob, what are 3 things that you're looking for in Iowa today?
Well, Michael, very exciting day. The weather, of course. And what kind of impact will that have on Trump supporters? On one hand, he's got the enthusiasm. We've seen that in the polls. On the other hand, he's expected to win big. So will some people say, I'm going to stay at home? So that leads into number 2. Number 2 is can Trump get to 50%? That would be significant. The record for winning Iowa on the Republican side is 12 points by Bob Dole. Trump wants that. And of course, the third thing is who finishes second place. Whoever finishes in second is going to have a lot of momentum going into New Hampshire, especially if that person is Nikki Haley.
So let's talk about the other one. We'll save Nikki Haley for after. Let's start with Ron DeSantis. He's really put everything into Iowa, right? I have right here, he's held more than 138 events. He's spent tens of millions of dollars there on advertising. If he doesn't have a good showing today, if he doesn't come in that second place, is it over for him? I mean, what does that mean for Ron DeSantis' chances going forward?
No, because he has spent so much money in Iowa, as you said. Remember, Trump did not win in 2016. Ted Cruz beat him in Iowa. So some people thought, certainly DeSantis, that maybe I can take him out in Iowa. Well, that hasn't happened, certainly with the polls. So I think he's in real trouble. There'll be a lot of speculation if he finishes third that he should drop out. But if he doesn't finish second, with all the millions he spent there, I think he's in real trouble.
Let's go to the other second-place contender, Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
Former President Trump, Marco Rubio, senator from Florida,
yeah.
Republican senator, endorsed former President Trump recently in this bid. In 2016, Haley endorsed Marco Rubio. What do you make of that?
It's fascinating. I mean, Rubio clearly sees the tea leaves. Trump has taken over this party. Rubio wants to run for president. Remember, Rubio was in it fairly late, along with Ted Cruz, and then his end was when Trump beat him in his home state of Florida. But this is fascinating, too, because DeSantis is from Florida. DeSantis and Rubio have never really gotten along and don't have the best relationship, so that's very telling. And I think that when Marco Rubio runs, whenever, down the road, he wants to be on record, yes, I supported Trump, because I think the Republican base is looking at Trump, even years from now, like the Democratic base looks at Obama. He is a revered character. So Rubio's move, very fascinating.
It was a really interesting move. If we talk about the makeup of the electorate in Iowa, former President Trump has strong support among evangelicals, right? It's a totally different playing field when you go to somewhere like New Hampshire. And of course, Iowa sets the tone for the remainder of the primaries. But talk a little bit about how, if former President Trump may have a big win tonight in Iowa, but it could be an entirely different situation when you get to somewhere like New Hampshire.
Totally. And these really states really do upend the race. They change the dynamic of the race, where the national polls not so important. So I expect Trump's going to get some momentum with a big win in Iowa. However, very different, as you mentioned, in New Hampshire. It's an open primary, so you have a lot of independents voting, a lot of people in New Hampshire who do not like President Trump, former President Trump. At the same time, this is something that if Trump can win Iowa and even get a close, narrow win in New Hampshire, well, and then they go to South Carolina, and right now he's beating Nikki Haley in her home state by a lot. That could change, though.
When we talk about another dynamic when you're discussing New Hampshire, there was sort of this curveball last week, Chris Christie dropping out, right?
Yeah.
New Hampshire was the state where he was doing the best in the polls. You mentioned independent voters. He's sort of trying to cater to those individuals. Where do you think Christie's supporters go?
I think most of them go to Haley. I think she's going to pick up around 8 points in New Hampshire, and that gets her very close to former President Trump. I think it's interesting now with the no labels. There's a lot of speculation. Will Chris Christie potentially run on the no labels ticket? Could eventually Nikki Haley run on there's a lot of third-party elements. And remember, Joe Biden won in 2020, but he won so narrowly. So these third parties, especially the no labels ticket, could make a difference one way or the other. both the Republicans and Democrats don't want they want no labels out of this thing. They think it would hurt both of them. But most people, if you look at polls, think it probably would hurt Biden. But it depends on who's on the ticket.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that in 2016 with the third-party candidate hurting Hillary Clinton there. Yep. When you talk about the Democratic side. Bringing things back to Iowa now, obviously one of the biggest storylines has been the weather. Yep. Sub-zero temperatures, insane snowfall, inclement weather conditions. The name of the game in Iowa when you're dealing with a caucus is turnout. How do you see these weather conditions affecting turnout? Everyone seems to have their own analysis on who it's going to affect, especially when you ask the candidates.
Well, you know, people in Iowa, they're pretty tough, and this only happens once every 4 years, so they're very excited about it. I think turnout's going to be pretty good, but again, and I think it's very smart for the candidates, including Trump, to say, get out there, you know, don't be complacent. I think Trump has really raised expectations with his touting that he's going to win these states by 50 points. If he only wins them by 15, then it looks not so great. So you want to really lower expectations, but I do think this does help Trump because of the enthusiasm factor. People who love Trump are not going to be staying home because of the weather. Mm-hmm.
And, of course, Iowa knows that the weather usually isn't going to be great around this time, right. But the dispatches from there look like it's pretty tough this time around. Staying on the topic of former President Trump, you know, if he ends up winning tonight, he'll give his victory speech, and we talk about how Iowa really sets the tone for the primary and the caucus season going forward. There's going to be a lot of focus on his remarks. How does he present himself as a candidate after this first, you know, early state? What will you be looking for in that victory speech, and what do you make of it in terms of, again, setting the tone for going forward?
I think it would be wise for him, if he has a big night, to certainly, we know he's going to spike the football, but don't spike it too hard, Mr. Trump, because you got New Hampshire upcoming. And remember, he's also talking to people. He's trying to win the independent vote down the road if he were to win the nomination. In 2020, he really never made a play for independent voters. He really focused on the base. So I think he's got to come across as presidential and not vindictive, and we've known sometimes Trump has been presidential. A lot of times he has been vindictive. I think he could turn off a lot of general election voters if he's spiking the ball too much.
Let's bring it back to Ron DeSantis for a second. He says that after Iowa, he's going straight to South Carolina, going, you know, forgetting about New Hampshire, not going to address that state right away. What do you make of this? Of course, you know, we talk about Nikki Haley and the lead, and not the lead, but how she's performing in New Hampshire. She's performing strong there. But Ron DeSantis is like, no New Hampshire for me. I'm going straight to Nikki Haley's home state. Yeah, it's interesting that he's going straight from Iowa, and then he'll be back in New Hampshire. But he's making the point, I'm going to go into your backyard, and I'm going to do well there, or at least that's what the message is. But at the same time, he can't get away from Iowa. They spent so much money and said, this is where we have to do well. And if he finishes third, well, remember, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama had a massive primary battle. Where did Hillary Clinton finish? She finished third behind John Edwards. And that was, you know, she came back in New Hampshire, but that was the first sign that she was vulnerable. And we shall see whether that's Trump or DeSantis, who has someone's going to have a rough night out of these three. And I think it's going to be probably DeSantis. Mm-hmm. Back to Trump for a second. You can't discuss candidate Trump without noting the various legal troubles surrounding him. The New York civil case just held closing arguments. We're getting up to some start dates for some, you know, the J6, the January 6th case, the election interference case. I know that after each indictment, we've seen that he hasn't been affected in the polls. In fact, he's gone up in the polls after these various indictments. What do you make of, and how do you think it'll affect the electorate when we're talking about seeing him go, you know, from court appearance to campaign stop, and we see that split screen? Do you think it'll have an impact among voters? I think it could. I think there could be some fatigue there of seeing him in court. But to this point, without a doubt, it's helped him. It's helped his fundraising. He plays that Joe Biden's coming after me with all these prosecutors, and that has worked. But that's worked with the Republican base. What about the general election? I do think that all of these court appearances for the general election and getting that sliver of independent votes is very important. Joe Biden got that vote. That's why he's president now. Trump needs that back, and Biden has really struggled since getting elected because of the economy, inflation, and a lot of independents and other groups that are very important to Joe Biden. His coalition is kind of crumbling now. Joe Biden's got a lot of work to do while these Republicans duke it out. Bob Cusack, first day of voting of year 2024. Several more to come. Thank you so much for joining us. Exciting. Thanks, Michael. And we'll see you on our next hour with another update on America's Vote 2024.